Okay, can you turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 8? If you didn't notice, we are actually this morning headed back into our series on the Gospel of Luke. So we've been out of it for a couple months as we had a Christmas series. We had our Pray First series in the beginning of the year. So it's been a little while since we jumped back in. But we've been in this series on and off for the last year. And we got more time in it, guys. We are finishing chapter 8 today, though. So it means we're a third of the way through. Okay, so buckle up. It should be good. But today we're going to jump back in the Gospel of Luke series. Let me just remind you what this the Gospel of Luke, written by Luke, who was a physician, so probably a very fact kind of oriented guy, and he's writing to someone, Theophilus, and he's really just talking about the truth of Christianity, trying to find the truth, trying to find the proof of that Jesus is who he says he is. And so it's very much these details that help us see who Jesus was. And so it's an awesome book. We're jumping back in that. It said Luke chapter 8. Luke is the third book in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke. If hit John, you've gone too far. So, hey, let me just give you some background before we jump in. We're going to start in verse 40. But before that, let me just give you some background on where we're at here. Because, like I said, it's been a while since we've been in this. So what just happened was Jesus and took the disciples and they sailed across the Sea of Galilee to the country of the area, the region of the Gerasenes. Okay, and this is where the storm happened. When the storm came up and they thought they were going to die, and Jesus is sleeping in the middle of it, and he calms the storm. That's on the way to this place. They get there. There's a demon-possessed man, says he lives among the tombs, who's just a complete nut job. Okay, is what they say. And they would chain him up, and he would break chains. And so this is a guy like everyone stayed away from. He lived among the tombs, it says. And as soon as Jesus lands, this man runs up, possessed by these demons, these many demons. They said they're legion. It says there's a whole legion of demons in him. They come, though. The demons come and just fall at Jesus' feet and say, "Don't kill us," which is really cool on just the power of Christ. But they say, "Don't kill us," and they say, "Please, just instead," which is kind of interesting. You think that Jesus has the power. He could just destroy the demons, let alone just move them away from someone, which is crazy. But he says, they say, "Hey, let us go into those pigs instead." And so he makes them go into the pigs. The pigs all run into the Sea of Galilee and drown themselves. Okay, and so then this guy is just talking normal. He's dressed normally. This is the guy that everyone's like, "Hey, nut job, lives in the tombs, crazy," that guy. So they go run and tell the town. The town comes out, and they see him talking normally, and it says they end up getting scared and kicking Jesus out, which I think all of us in a lot of these situations, I can't believe they kicked Jesus out. They are just so unholy. It's I want you to get the scene. They knew this crazy guy who everyone stay away from, and that's how they'd known him. They run to see what happened. He's sitting normal, talking to this guy, Jesus. They heard the story, and behind them in the Sea of Galilee is a bunch of floating dead pigs. Okay, I want you to get the scene, right? They're like, "Please go away." I don't know what you're doing, and so they kick him out. It scares them too much. Okay, and so then they head back across the lake to, presumably to Galilee. Okay, I think they might have been in Capernaum, somewhere in there. But Galilee is like a region, okay, and so there's lots of towns. Okay, and so this is where we pick up this story. They head back. It sounds like the journey back across the lake was better, okay? And so this is where we pick up. They head back across the lake, and we pick it up in verse 40. Right here. And so verse 40, it says, "Now when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him." And so this crowd is literally waiting at the shore, right? Waiting for him coming across the lake again, because he had been there before, went and came back, okay? And there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue, and falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house. Let me stop for a second. When he says he's a ruler of the synagogue, that means he would have been basically in charge of kind of coordinating things for the synagogue services that they held. And so this is a prominent man in the community, in the Jewish community. So a prominent man, a very righteous man, a guy like that, okay? So that's what that means, ruler of the synagogue. And falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. As Jesus went, the people pressed around him. So Jesus says he'll go with him. They pressed around him. And I want you to understand this pressing thing, okay? I want you to understand this tells you how large this crowd is, too. They're all waiting for him. And then when he says he's going to go to Jairus' house, they go into the narrow city streets, and it's like trying to just stuff a bunch of people into the city street. And so that's the idea of this pressing. It's not like they were trying to dogpile on Jesus, okay? So some of you guys don't know what a dogpile is? Okay, wake up. Jason made you guys all to go sleep. You listened good for him, and then no. So that's what it is. It's this idea of this huge crowd is trying to follow Jesus because he's headed to Jairus' house, and they just it's like going through a funnel, and they just start pressing it along. The same verb used for pressed here is the same one he used a chapter earlier when talking about the parable of the sower and the seed, the wheat that would get crushed out by the weeds, okay? That's that same word, that pressed in. So that's what it is. It's not so much that. It's just they're all trying to be close to Jesus, and they just can't fit. And so it's just this crazy crowd now going through. It's really hectic thing as they're trying to get there. So verse 43, and there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. And let me just explain this. I'm reading out of the ESV this morning. Sorry if it was different than yours. If the NIV, it might say the one with the issue of blood. But what I want you to understand about this is a woman that basically, to put it politely, is stuck in one part of a woman's menstrual cycle. Okay, I want you to understand that. So all the young single guys in the room went, ooh, okay, and then everybody else, good to go. Okay, but I want you to understand that. Why? It's like, why are you talking about that? Because for us, it's like, hey, that would be terrible. We're talking 12 years, it says. She says, it would be terrible for us. But this was a whole bigger deal in this culture, okay, because during that time of the month or whatever, okay, a woman was considered unclean, ceremonially unclean, okay? So that meant she couldn't go to the synagogue. When you're unclean, you couldn't do that. And for this case, it would have to wait till that time was over, okay? And when someone is ceremonially unclean, even a touch to someone else, like if you just put your hand on someone, that would considered that transfer of uncleanness to that person. Now, it was temporary for them. They could go through something and get clean or whatever, but it still was like a troublesome thing. You didn't do that. So you got to imagine that this is a big ordeal. This is not just a physical thing. This is even like a spiritual thing. Like she hadn't been in church for 12 years. I mean, she hadn't been to the synagogue to worship in 12 years because she's unclean. Not to mention, like she can't touch anybody, any other Jewish person. I mean, so if she's married, she couldn't do that. If she wasn't, then she wasn't getting married during this time. And we don't know how old she was. So this is like a whole ordeal. And so this is probably why also she uses the crowd here when it says she tries to get into the crowd. And this is why she's sneaking through, because she's not supposed to be touching someone, especially someone like Jesus. And so I just want to explain that. So verse 44 says, she came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. Okay, let me explain this. We just took some of the worship team over to a worship conference, and somebody talked about this, and so I did some study on this. When they talk about the fringe of his garment, some of the old school might be thinking of the hem of his garment. You sing the Sam Cooke song. Anybody know the Sam Cooke song? Guys, get some culture here, okay? Sam Cooke, look him up. It's a powerful song. But we're not actually talking about like the hem of his robe or whatever that was on there. It says the fringe of his garment. That there was a tassel that would be on this ceremonial garment that Jewish people would wear, okay? And a tassel on the end of the square garment that was thrown over the left shoulder and hanging down the back. Okay, that's according to the Tyndale New Testament commentary. Okay, so this ceremonial garment they would wear. And you see that in Numbers 15:37. You can throw that up on the screen. I want you to get this. The Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, throughout the generations to come, you are to make tassels on the corners of your garments with blue cord on each tassel. You will have these tassels to look at, and so you will remember all the commands of the Lord, that you may obey them and not prostitute yourselves by going after the lusts of your own hearts and eyes. Then you will remember to obey all the commands and will be consecrated to your God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. Okay, which is kind of God's way of ending something when he speaks, but he's also kind of bringing it around. what I want you to understand is what she is doing here is she thinks, man, there's these tassels. So as a Jewish man, Jesus would have worn, these ceremonial garments. And she's like, if I could just touch that tassel, I know if I could just touch his, because it's Jesus. And these tassels were, basically a reminder of God's faithfulness, so that it says when we see them, we would remember to be faithful to him. That was what the Jewish people were said to do. So I think it's so cool. Is like these were a representation of the faithfulness of God, and when she touched that tassel, just immediately God was faithful. Isn't that cool? So I want you to understand that, though, because there's also part of this when he confronts her about it in a second, is she's probably being a little superstitious with that too, thinking if I just touch this ceremonial garment of him, I'll be made well. But it's still so cool how, man, she touches that, and then God's faithful instantly when she touches. So that's what we're talking about here as she reaches out, touches that. Immediately she's healed. Verse 45 says, and Jesus said, who was it that touched me? When all denied it, Peter said, Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing in on you. And I love that because Peter's like the are you kidding me guy in the story, like he is in many stories. But I think we give him a hard time about this. But one is like, Peter was kind of a funny guy. So sometimes it's like he might have just been telling a joke, or like a friend would be like, are you kidding me right now? But because remember, they're like all pressed in, everybody's touching him. But I think what's funny is we give him a hard time. But look right before that. Everybody denied it. Like, who touched me? Oh, I didn't. Like, he's like up against him. It's like, no, I didn't touch you. It's like he's not the crazy one. He's like, God, seriously, Jesus, everybody's touching. Everybody else like, no, I didn't touch you, But it allows, when he says that, what Jesus, he kind of explains what he meant, though, is verse 46. But Jesus said, someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me. Okay, and just in that, I want you to understand, he knew that something happened. I think he knew what was going on for this whole thing, and there's a reason why he wants to not just let this go. And he says, when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. And so what I want you to understand is, remember, she was starting to stay hidden in the crowd. After she was healed, she still tried to stay hidden, okay? Even though she said immediately she could feel her bleeding stop. She was instantly healed, but she didn't jump up because remember, she was still unclean when she touched him. And so she was just like super nervous. She was trying to stay. And when he's like, no, somebody touched me. Power went out from me. There's something that just happened. She realizes, no. And so that's why, I think part of why she came trembling. She may have been also just the power of God touched her, and she was just trembling from everything that happened. But a lot of, I think, what's going on here is she's still scared. Like, I understand this, like she just touched, not on a clean man, a rabbi, and like she's just nervous about it. But that's part of why Jesus confronts her. One is I think he did kind of want to make sure she knew is like, it wasn't like the tassel. It wasn't that superstitious thing. It was the power that came. But he also is just so tender in this moment. He says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Because remember, she tells everybody in this huge crowd, I was unclean, I just touched him, but I was healed. And his response is not like, well, I need to go get clean. It's like he just says, daughter, your faith has healed you. And actually, this is the only time we have recorded that he uses the word daughter for a woman in the Bible. Now, there may have been other times he did, but it just shows his tenderness in that moment. He's like, daughter, your faith is here. Don't be scared. It's amazing what God's done for you. And he says, go, everything's done. Everything's okay. And so then we pick up in 49. He just says, while he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came, so from Jairus' house, your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore. But Jesus, on hearing this, answered him, do not fear, only believe, and she will be well. And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except Peter, James, and John, and the father and the mother of the child. And let me just stop for a second here. I want you to understand kind of what's going on here too. Is they get to the house, okay? Because he kept going, even though they heard word that the daughter that he was going to heal is now dead. But he says, let's keep going. And they get to the house. Remember, a huge crowd. And when they get there, he says, okay, Peter, James, and John, which might be one of the first times he singles those guys out. But later we see this a lot because he kind of is training them extra here to kind of lead the disciples later. And so he says, you guys come in. Jesus comes in, and he says, Jairus and his wife. So I don't know if his wife was with him the whole time or if she just came out and was right there. But he leaves the crowd out, okay? And then the scene here is there's other accounts of this in Matthew and Mark, and there's more people there, okay? There's more people in the house. The other ones say he puts everybody out because there's one of them that talks about like flute players. There would have been like professional mourners there. I mean, it was like the funeral service had started. Like they used to instantly, if someone died, you just start that because usually they would bury them before the next day. It was like that night they would take care of that. And so there's mourners there. There's probably family there because somebody ran. It was probably a family member, somebody that ran from the house or a messenger from the house, a servant came. But he takes them all in, but then he kicks everybody out. The big thing is he doesn't let the crowd come in and see this. And I think a lot of it is, there's debate on when he gets in there, he says he kicks them out, and people have talked about like because of the atmosphere. We'll talk about why in a second. But I really think it was just out of care and compassion for this family and this daughter, because these people are mourning, and then he says something and they start laughing at him because they think he's crazy. It was just, he's like, everybody get out. So when I do this, it's not going to be in front of this huge crowd. And so the other disciples stay outside. They're on crowd control outside. And just out of respect, I think he goes in like this. And so 52 says, and all were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, child, arise. And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. And he directed that something should be given her to eat. So Jesus goes in, raises from the dead. Like I said, I think there were people in the house because it says that they laughed at him because they knew she was dead. The crowd didn't know she was dead. They knew what Jesus knew, was somebody told them that she was dead. So there's probably people in there. He kind of kicks everybody out, and he heals this young girl. And I don't think when he says, oh, she's just asleep, some people debate, say, oh, well, maybe he knew she was just in a coma and she wasn't dead, so he actually didn't heal her. But it says her spirit returned to her. So she was dead, but I do think it shows the power and perspective of Jesus. Because for him, he says, the idea of us going to just wake somebody up, that's like him going to, raise him from the dead. It's just that easy for him. And I just think for him, he's like, no, it's just temporary, is what he was trying to say. It's like, no, she's gonna live. We'll take care of this. And it shows that perspective that he has, even on death. And so her spirit comes back. He says, get the girl something to eat. And then it says, and her parents were amazed, but he charged them not to tell anyone that what happened. And that's it, guys. That's all that happened in a half hour of Jesus' life. That's it. So pretty boring, think about that. This story is crazy. There's so much going on. There's two healings, and they kind of happen at once. One goes on the way to the other, and there's just all this stuff that happens. And so it's a powerful story, and it's really cool. But what about for us? What does this mean for us? And how can this help us? What can we learn from this? And the bottom line, I think this passage is not only about the power of Jesus Christ, but it's about the pursuit of God's healing power, okay? Because both of these people in this story are pursuing God's healing power, okay? And so I'm sure there may be some of you right now that are pursuing God's healing power for something. There may be some of you that you're pursuing something from God, some power of God, some blessing from God, or at some point you have or you will. Okay, that there's time we are pursuing God for the power that can come from Him. So I want to give you guys some practical things out of this, of what can we learn, how can we better pursue God's healing power like we see from these people. And the first thing is this: be humble. Okay. So now you can get into filling in the blanks there in your notes. Okay, this will be the first one. It's be humble. Okay? Look back at verse 41. It says, and there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue, and falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house. Jairus humbled himself, okay? He humbled himself before, he just literally fell at his feet. But I want you to understand, Jairus was a prominent man in the community. If you're the ruler of the synagogue, you're in charge of those things, you would have been a prominent person in this community, someone people looked up to, and he's in the front of a whole crowd of people from his town, his community, and he doesn't care. He just falls at Jesus' feet and just pleads with him to come because he needs him. And so it is so important for us to position ourselves to receive from God. Okay, and that doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but there's something to understanding just that humble nature, that falling at his feet. I don't care what other people think. I wonder, well, what are they praying about? Oh, I wonder what they need from God. I bet they're messed up. You know, whatever. Jairus didn't care. He didn't care at all. He just fell at his feet. Guys, pride has no place in the kingdom of God. All throughout the Bible, you'll see that there is no place in the kingdom of God for pride. And it always hinders anything that God wants to do. And so not coming to him pridefully, because the thing is, I want you to understand something this morning. God doesn't owe you anything. God doesn't owe me anything. Look, 1 Corinthians 6, there's a sentence there between 19 and 20. It says, you are not your own. You were bought with a price. And the context here is talking about what you do and don't do with your body, okay? And it's talking about your temples of the Holy Spirit, and so therefore, staying away from sexual immorality, and that's all that. But really, Paul's using the spiritual truth to help you, motivate you in what you to do. This is the same thing. You're not your own. You're bought at a price, and so therefore, man, I don't come to God saying like, hey, you owe me. Like, hey, I need this from you. It's like, man, he's already given everything for you. And that doesn't mean he doesn't want to do something for you, because he does. This whole story is full of the compassion of Jesus. All Jesus' ministry was just constantly had compassion on people. He gave, when he looked at the woman and said, daughter, your faith is healed. It's like, there's just so much compassion. God wants to heal you. God wants to give you good gifts, but we can't come to him with this like, God, I've been doing this, and I've been doing this, and I've been doing that. And so I think it's about time it's like, man, he's given everything. Jairus didn't come and say, I'm a ruler of the synagogue, and I've been serving God faithfully, and therefore I just think, I've maybe earned this, or maybe it's about time you did something for me too. It's like he just fell at his feet and said, please, Lord, I need you. And that's not how he did. So, and instead, he just pleaded for Jesus to help him in his time of desperate need, okay? And that brings us to the second thing, which is this: get desperate. When you're pursuing God's healing power, get desperate. Get desperate. Look, Jairus was desperate, as we just saw. He didn't care what other people thought. He just needed Jesus. But also the woman was desperate in this. I want to talk about this for a second. Verse 43, it says, there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. I want you to get the desperate nature of this woman not wanting to miss an opportunity to be touched by Jesus. Like, she's a ceremonially unclean woman, okay, pushing through a crowd to get to a rabbi and touch his ceremonial garment. Like, that was like, no, don't, please. Like whatever, all these things. But she's like, I have to reach Jesus. That was the desperate shake. She didn't care. She was going to be in trouble. But see, I know I just need a touch from Jesus. She was just so desperate. It says she spent all her money. It says all her living. That means every penny she had spent on trying to be healed for 12 years. Okay, sometimes we read things, especially in the New Testament and the Gospels, it's like, this happened, this, and boom. Because, like, again, half an hour of Jesus' life is, like, crazy, okay? But for 12 years, she's been bleeding. I mean, talk about, like, she's broke. She spent all her money. She's not been able to go to the synagogue and worship for over a decade. She hasn't been able to touch anyone. Like I mentioned earlier, if she was married, that's probably not going well right now. I'm just telling you. You can read in the Old Testament, there was no going on when you're unclean like that. Okay, if she wasn't married, she wasn't getting married, she wouldn't have been able to. I mean, so her personal life is terrible. She's completely broke, and just imagine how you'd feel. I mean, just think about, even though it's something that's kind of it's natural and part of, but not for 12 years, bleeding for 12 years. Think how anemic you'd feel all the time. I mean, just how weak you'd feel. You lose all the iron and all that stuff. I mean, I just want you to understand, this is where she was at for over a decade of just like, she was at the end of her rope. She was at the end of her rope. But she knew that Jesus was her only hope. She had exhausted all of her avenues. She was at the end of her rope. There was nothing left but Jesus. And that's what it means to get desperate for God. There was no other way I could go about this except Jesus. That's what it means to be desperate for Jesus and his power in your life. And get this, the intensity with which we pursue God is often equal to our awareness of our need for him. We should get that this morning. I really, I could say always, but there's certain times maybe not. But the intensity with which you pursue after God is going to be equal to how much you realize I need him. Really, what she said is this is her last hope. She had tried everything else. All right, there was nothing else left but Jesus. So she pursued him like maybe Jesus was her only hope, right? Like that's all she had left, and that's the way she pursued him. I don't care if I get in trouble because I'm unclean. I don't care. I'm not letting Jesus walk by and not going to touch him, not going to have his healing power touch me. And sometimes when we don't realize our need for Jesus, how much we need the power of God in our life, how much we need that healing power, how much that's really our only hope, we don't necessarily pursue him like that. We kind of say, well, God, if you can, could you? I'll try that, and I do that too. I'm not throwing that. There's just times where I'm not pursuing him desperately for something because I just don't really feel like I need to. It's not the only avenue, it'd just be one. And so I just encourage you, get desperate. Do you know how much you need Jesus right now? Do you know that Jesus is your only hope? Because when you do, you'll pursue him like he is. Okay? When you know that Jesus is your only hope, you'll pursue him like he is your only hope. Okay, next one is this: have faith. That seems simple, but have faith. When you pursue God, have faith. Verse 48 says, and Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." And remember, I think there was part of this, he wanted to make sure she knew, like, hey, you're not in trouble, okay? But then there was another thing is I think he was trying to, make sure she knew. It wasn't like, hey, if anybody would just touch the tassel. Because you actually see something later in one of the Gospels where they're like, people came, if they've just touched the fringe of his garment, like there's probably already a rumor that, like the thing that went out there was like, hey, if you touch that tassel, you're going to be healed. It's crazy. And he was trying to make sure she knew. It was like, it had nothing to do with that. He said, daughter, your faith has healed you. Because you believed that you would be healed by the power of Jesus, you were. And so the woman's faith is credited in her healing. She didn't even ask for anything. She didn't have Jesus' attention. I mean, there was no, it was like, okay, he said this and that. She just believed. She just believed that she would be healed. And I just want you to know, our faith plays a role, okay? God is sovereign, but your faith still matters, okay? God is sovereign, okay? God does that means he's in control. He has the choice, but your faith still matters, okay? It still matters. And I'm not saying that you're healing, if you're like, hey, I've been praying for something and I just, it's not happening, that means you don't have enough faith. I think that's a dangerous road to walk, okay? Is to say that your healing hinges completely on your faith, okay? Because there are plenty of times we see that healing power happen when someone maybe didn't necessarily have faith, maybe somebody else did for them or some things like that. But I don't want you to get legalistic about this this is something that's really hard. It's like, hey, do I not have enough faith? And we can really beat ourselves up with if I just have more faith, God would do this. And again, you're not earning anything from God. He's not saying if your faith gets to here, then you're good, and anything above that is good. And so I think that's wrong. But however, I also think it's wrong, and in fact, unbiblical to say your faith doesn't play a role at all. Because right here he even says, your faith has healed you. So when you go to God, And Jesus said this often about your faith, and he would talk about little faith or whatever, but just make sure you're trusting God's faithfulness, okay? If you're asking him to be faithful, make sure you're trusting God's faithfulness, okay? And that's the biggest thing, is knowing that I know that God is faithful. And so if because what you're doing is asking him to be faithful, just like when she was going to that tassels, that same thing is like, I want the faithfulness of God right now. And she believes she'd receive it. And so I just encourage you, have faith, okay? Make sure you're still trusting God when you come. Okay, next thing is this. Don't compare. Don't compare. Okay, verse 49 says, while he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore. Now, I want you to get, and I'll talk about this more in a minute, but I want you to understand what's happening is like Jesus was, if I said while he was still speaking, like while he was saying, daughter, your faith has healed you to someone, Jairus receives word that his daughter died. And so what I want you to understand, I'll talk more about that in a minute, but that's when he found out somebody told him you didn't make it. And while this woman is going from here to here, Jairus was already, and just everything just hit the floor. And I'm not saying he did. We don't know. I mean, we don't know his demeanor, but I'm not saying he was comparing and saying, hey, that's not fair. But I know personally that most of us, we struggle with that at times. It's like, man, if I need this from God and I'm pursuing it, I'm just not seeing it right now. I'm not seeing it right now. And somebody else is being blessed and someone else is being healed. And you just think, well, why not me? And you get in this comparison game. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever done that? With whatever it is maybe that you've been praying about? And sometimes, guys, when you're in your darkest moment, your darkest time, the other people, someone else is going to be receiving a blessing, okay? And that doesn't mean that God doesn't see you. And it doesn't mean that God doesn't hear you, okay? Hear that from my heart today. Is it so easy to think, well, why did he hear their prayers and not mine? Or why does he love that person and not me? And I know there's people in this room, you've had that, you've struggled with that, you've had this where you're praying for this and you see all these other people getting that thing. And I just want you to understand that this is why comparison is always terrible in every area of life, including when it comes to receiving from God. When we start comparing, it's so terrible. Because here's the deal. Jairus hadn't been there for the 12 years of suffering. He had just been there for the moment of healing. Okay, and sometimes we can get bitter about someone else's blessing, yet we were never part of their suffering. You guys get that? Is what we're doing, and it's so easy because guess what? We're human beings, and this is what we do in our flesh. But we can get bitter about someone else receiving something from God, some blessing, some healing. But it's like we weren't there for all the suffering. We were just there for the moment that the breakthrough happened. This is 12 years. He never even probably knew this woman. Maybe he did, I don't know. But he wasn't part of all that. He didn't feel all that. But he saw the healing. And to think, why is this going up and mine's going down? It's just, comparison is never fair. Okay? It's never fair. And God is doing something beyond what you understand anyway. And so I just want to encourage you, just like in any area of your life, but when it comes to pursuing blessing and healing from God, don't compare your story with other people's. It's never going to be fair because you're never going to have been there for all of it. You're never going to understand what God's doing. You're not going to understand God's timing. And even if your life groups meeting this week, we'll talk. One of the discussion questions talks about the timing of God with these stories, and it is interesting, but I don't have time to go into it today. But the truth is that the only thing that witnessing others' healing and blessing should do for us is remind us that God is still faithful, that God still does heal, that God still does hear us and see us and care about us. And that's the flesh won't do that, but the Spirit of God in you will. Okay, when you see someone else receiving something that you've been praying for, it should just, the Spirit in you should say, see, he still does. He still does that. And when you see someone else get healed, say, God still heals. He still heals, not for me yet or not for them yet, but he still does. Okay? And so I just encourage you, don't compare in the flesh. Okay, let those things boost your faith, but remember, you don't have all the details. Okay? God does. So trust him. Goes back to that faith thing. And don't compare. Last thing is this: persevere. Persevere. You can go and fill that in your notes. You know, the story of this woman being healed is one of the most famous healings of Jesus' ministry. I feel like this is one that almost everybody knows about when they think about it. I would guess, though, if I asked most of you, hey, when did that happen? You would have remembered the crowd. You'd have remembered like that she pushed through and she touched the hem. But I'm guessing most of you in this room wouldn't have remembered it was when they were on the way to Jairus' house. And I'm not saying that to beat you up. I don't often think of that either. But I want you to think for a second, when we talk about persevering and being persistent as we seek God's healing, I want you to think about this story from the perspective of Jairus for a moment. I want you to think, Jairus and his wife, they're faithful to God, and they're just servants. Have that servant heart, and they've been serving God faithfully. Probably come from a good family line, and so they've been serving. Eventually, that leads to him being a ruler in the synagogue. Just somebody of prominence, and he's just there to serve. And they get married at some point, and they start to try to have kids, and maybe it's kind of a struggle for a little bit. Maybe it's kind of a struggle, and they've been trying, but finally they get pregnant. Okay, and it's a little girl. And she's the cutest little girl, and they just love her to death. And they've always wanted kids, and so they love this girl. But then at some point, like Jairus, you're like, hey, I really like a boy though. I need somebody to take care of me when I'm old. This is how this culture works. But just my legacy to pass on. I'm gonna continue to have some more kids, and you try to have, and you don't have another one. You try to have another kid, you just can't have another one. You try to, and you can't. Maybe there's a miscarriage on the way you thought, but not so much. And so for a decade, you've been trying to have more kids, and you don't. And you just have this one daughter, and over that decade, it's just been like your heart gets more and more fond of this little girl. One, because she's just so adorable. I mean, she was 12, so maybe she's preteen, so you never know. But during that time when she was a little girl, I mean, it's because she's just such a sweet girl. Maybe she's just has the greatest heart, and she loves the Lord, and you're just seeing all these things, and not only you're fond of her because of that, but it's like she's your miracle child. She was born, and you've not had any since or before. It's like she was the one time when you praised God for the blessing, and you get a decade later and think, but God has blessed me with her. And we're just going to continue to love her and grow. But then one day she gets sick. And she gets real sick. And you have the doctors come and try to figure out what's happening, and they can't figure it out. And she's getting worse and worse. And like that, all of a sudden, it's like she's on her deathbed. This is your miracle baby. And you're like, oh, this is the one I prayed for. And I prayed for more, and this is all God gave me, and now he's taken it away. I don't understand. And then you remember that Jesus had just been there. You'd heard about this guy, and you hear somebody run by the house. I mean, your daughter's just dying right there, and you hear somebody run by the house, and you think, and you say, hey, Jesus is coming back across the lake. He's coming back across the lake, and so you're like, honey, I gotta go. I gotta go and try to see if he'll come, because if he comes, maybe this is what is our only hope to make this happen. And you run to the lake, and you stand there at the edge of the lake, and you watch that boat come in, maybe for hours, and you just watch it come in. And when it hits, all the crowd pushes through, but you push through faster, and you just fall on your knees before Jesus and just say, please, got my only daughter, my miracle baby girl, she's dying right now. Would you please come? And Jesus says, lead the way. and everything in you has this hope started, but she's dying right in this moment. We got to go, and this huge crowd is following with and just pushing into Jesus, and it's slowing everything down, and you're just trying to get there, and you're out front, and come on, we got to go, and you're trying to just stay out in front of the crowd, you're leading the way, and all of a sudden from behind you, you hear Jesus say something, and you're kind of confused, and he's talking about people touching him, and then this woman comes out and shares this story about being healed and in this moment, and it's this amazing, but in the back of your mind, you're thinking she's dying right now. And you want to say, Jesus, come on, we got to go. You're going to be late. And he says, your faith is, and while he's talking from behind you, you hear a familiar voice. It's one of your siblings from the house. And when you see him, you know what it means, but you don't want to go there. And he comes up and says, hey, it's too late. She didn't make it. And everything in you just hits the floor. And you turn around to look at Jesus because you're like, man, what do I do? We didn't make it. And before you can even respond, Jesus looks and responds for you. And he says, don't fear. Just believe. And she will be well. What I want you to understand is, we all know how the rest of the story went. They continue to go. Jesus looks back and says, keep going. It's not too late. And of course she's healed. And again, raising someone from the dead is like waking them up for Jesus. But I want you to understand those words. As I read this a couple weeks ago, man, this just hit my heart so deeply. As I want you to think in that moment where Jairus was when Jesus spoke those words to him. He thought all had been lost. He was so close. And then everything just fell apart. It was just getting worse. And not only worse, it was the worst. But Jesus looked at him and said, don't fear. Just believe. And she will be well. Jesus encouraged Jairus to persevere, to have persistent faith, even when things seem to be getting worse or even hopeless. See, persistent faith is leaning fully on hope when all you can see is hopelessness. That's what it means to persevere. It's when you lean completely into hope, which is Jesus, when all you can see in front of you is hopelessness. That's why Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Even when your eyes see hopelessness, even when your ears hear hopelessness, remember, Jesus says to that, don't fear, just believe, and she will be well. Okay? Would you bow your heads and pray with me?